Even after the conversion of the first Gentile in Acts chapter 10, it was hard for the early Jewish Christians to accept that Gentiles could be saved and become part of the church without coming under the Jewish covenant and laws. Acts 10:11 through 18 describe this early controversy. These early Christians were extremely prejudiced against Gentiles, though zealous to preach the gospel everywhere, but only to the Jews, according to Acts 11:19. Due to the persecution in Jerusalem, Jewish Christians had fled to Antioch of Syria, where the gospel began to spread to a great number of Gentile proselyte Greeks, Acts 11:20. The Jewish Jerusalem church was nervous about the purity of Gentile converts, so they sent Barnabas 340 miles to investigate. He needed help. Barnabas remembered Saul was a Roman citizen, raised in a Gentile city, so he walked 125 miles to Tarsus to recruit Saul for the Antioch church, Acts 11:25. They pastored together for a year, Acts 11:26, from 43 to 44 AD. A severe drought motivated the mixed Christian church in Antioch to send some aid to the Christians in Judea. So Barnabas and Saul went to Jerusalem to deliver the offering, Acts 11:27 to 30. When they finished their mission, Acts 12:25, Barnabas and Saul returned to Antioch and were joined by John Mark, Barnabas' nephew. Sometime the next year, the church knew that 2 of their 5 pastors should spread the good news further to the Gentile world to the north, Acts 13:1 to 3. So they released them from their pastoral duties and sent them on their first evangelistic journey into the unreached towns, Acts 13:4, at about 45 AD. They would be gone for about 2 years. Barnabas, Saul, and John Mark probably walked to the port of Antioch or Seleucia to find a Rome-bound cargo ship of grain for a trip to the island of Cyprus, Barnabas' birthplace, according to Acts 4:36, which was about 100 miles off the shore of Syria. Stopping in Salamis, the team walked across the island, visiting an estimated 13 towns and villages, and eventually arriving at the east capital of Paphos, Acts 13:4-6. Paphos served as the seat of the island's government in the New Testament era. Upon their arrival, the missionaries were summoned to appear before the Roman proconsul, who desired to hear their message personally. Here, Paul faced his first opposition and also had the first recorded conversion to his gospel message. A Jewish prophet named Bar-Jesus sought to confound the apostles, but Paul withstood him, and Bar-Jesus was struck with blindness, Acts 13:6-12. Seeing what had occurred and becoming enamored with the gospel, the proconsul Sergius Paulus believed and became a disciple of Christ. As a result of this event, Western Cyprus became the first Christian-ruled district within the Roman Empire. When they landed at Perga, Pamphylia, then John Mark abandoned the team, returning home in Acts 13:13. But Barnabas and Saul continued preaching in the synagogues, gathering a nucleus of disciples while continuing to preach to the Gentiles. From Perga they went north into the rugged Anatolian ranges along the Gestros River Valley. Here the narrative changes. Saul's name henceforth is called Paul. This stretch in their itinerary would have taken them through the Taurus mountain range near the Gestros River on a Roman military road via Sebaste. In Antioch, many believed Paul's message, a fact that further inflamed the Jewish hostilities. There, the majority of the Jews rejected the gospel, Acts 13:45. So Paul declared that they would go henceforth to the Gentiles, 13:46. As a result, the Orthodox Jewish readers insidiously created a rebellion within Antioch, and the 2 missionaries were driven from the territory in 1350. From Pisidian Antioch, they went 80 mountainous miles to Iconium, Acts 13:51, where Paul and Barnabas remained in Iconium for a long time, according to 14:1-6, and many were captive by their message. But some of the Jews, quote, poisoned their minds, end quotes, in chapter 14, verse 2, against them. Paul and Barnabas kept teaching the message of grace and doing signs and wonders. The team learned of a plot to stone them, so they fled to the nearby town of Lystra, 20 miles away. In the first century, an important center of commerce in the Eastern Roman world. While there, Paul healed a man who had been crippled from birth. When the people tried to offer sacrifices to them in chapter 14, verses 6 through 18, Paul and Barnabas strongly insisted that they were mere mortals. The Jewish antagonists from Pisidian Antioch and Iconium succeeded in tracing the team to Lystra, where they persuaded some individuals to stone Paul. The apostle was dragged out of the city and left dead, Acts 14:19. However, he got up and returned to Lystra to preach again. Paul's mission to Lystra must ultimately be judged a success, if only because of the conversion of the family of Timothy, mentioned in 2 Timothy 1:5 and Acts 16:1-3. The next day they left for Derbe, Acts 14:20, a 70-mile hike where they won many disciples. Derbe was the only place in Asia on this journey where the apostles were not persecuted. The fact that many disciples were made while Paul and Barnabas remained in Derbe allows for the inference that they may have stayed there for a considerable time in Acts 14:20-21. At Derbe, Paul would have been less than 100 miles from his hometown of Tarsus, and only about 200 miles away from Antioch in Syria. Nevertheless, instead of taking a direct route to the east, passing through the Cilician gates and arriving in Antioch in about 10 days, Paul's concern for the fledgling congregation compelled him to retrace his steps and travel nearly 700 miles on foot before concluding his journey. His choice of itinerary would have taken him back through the towns where only a short time earlier he had received harsh treatment and rejection, which would have required a healthy dose of fearlessness on his part. But Paul had important business to conduct among the selected route. He had to, number one, strengthen the disciples. 2, encourage believers to remain strong amidst their many tribulations. And 3, appoint elders in every city. Acts 14:22-23. From Derbe he returned north to Lystra, and after a few days on to Iconium, and then returning to Pisidian Antioch. Now he turned south through the mountain passes and making his way back to the province of Pamphylia on the coast in Acts 14:24. There they preached in Perga, Acts 14:25, and Paul went down to the Mediterranean port of Attalia, the chief port of Pamphylia at the time, and preached until passage could be secured on a ship for their return to Syria and their home church in Antioch, Acts 14:26. When they arrived back home, he reported what God was beginning to do among the Gentiles, Acts 14:27. They would stay there for a long time, it says in Acts 14:28, probably 3 years, from about 47 through 49 AD. In about 50 AD, Paul and Barnabas and a Gentile named Titus went up to Jerusalem to call together the Jerusalem Council to decide the fate of future Gentile evangelism. Did Gentiles need to become Jewish to be saved? A gospel free of Jewish legalism was approved, and they were given the right hand of fellowship to continue preaching to the Gentiles the grace of God in Galatians 2:9. This was 14 years after Paul's conversion, according to Galatians 2:1-9 and Acts 15:2. Judas and Silas joined Paul and Barnabas when they returned together to Antioch in Acts 15:22, where they spent, quote, no little time with the believers in Antioch, chapter 14, verse 28. Thus ended the first evangelistic journey of Paul. He had traveled 1,581 miles, walking most of the way at a maximum of 18 miles a day, in an estimated 53 days of travel, at a cost of about 237 denarii each. Their travel costs were about $830 for each one of them. This would be the shortest and cheapest of his journeys. The team spent the winter of 50 AD in Antioch before beginning their second evangelistic journey in the spring of 51 AD in Acts 15:36, which would be almost twice as long as their first journey.